We were just talking about drainage and drain tile a little bit when we mentioned Crazy Top. Well, if you've got an especially low area that you can't get that water out with gravity, you're probably going to need a lift station, so that's our next topic.
You know, we think about water and movement, and we're fortunate most of our farms have got some roll to them, but when you get down to those flat areas, and we've got some on our farm too, it's tough because there are so many gallons of water. When you get an inch of rainwater, you don't think of, well, that's 27,000 gallons of water. You think, oh, it's an inch. Well, that's not very much, you know, just an inch across the ground. But when you add it all up, it does get to be a lot of volume. So here's the thing, Brian, properly sizing that pump is often one of the questions that farmers have. Hey, I've got 40 acres. It all needs to come through that pump. How do I size that?
Yeah, well, it's not that tough. Again, the 27,000 gallons roughly is an acre-inch of water. So how much water do you want to get rid of and how many acres are you draining? For example, the first lift station we put in on our farm a few years ago was covering about 75 acres, and we said half-inch drainage coefficient. Well, basically then when you run the simple math, we're talking about 1 million gallons a day. 1 million gallons, that's a lot of water.
Yeah, it sure is. And then the other thing with that pump is, all right, what if it runs for a little bit and then it quits? What if it's just barely getting fed? How do you do that without burning the pump
Yeah,
out?
so, well, the first thing is you want to have somewhat of a reservoir below the ground. So for us, we had a 12-inch line that extended about 1,000 feet. So that is able to hold quite a bit of water to keep that pump running. The second thing is you really want to look at a variable drive pump. We've had some neighbors that have put in just regular pumps and they burn out in just a few months because, yes, it's constant on and off. With the variable drive, then basically if it needs to run fast, it will, but if it can slow down, then it will run at a slower pace, pumping out fewer gallons per hour.
All right, well, you talk about these pumps, Brian, and getting power out to some of those areas in fields is another challenge because, hey, it's not right next to your house, it's in a field that may be a few miles away.
Yeah, but livestock producers deal with this same thing too. So you can put up something for solar if you want to. But the big thing that we start talking about here is, well, these pumps could be pretty good sized. For us, it was a 7.5 horsepower pump. So you got to have a fair amount of power running to that all the time, and I would like it to run 24 hours a day when I actually need it. So what we did, we were pretty lucky, and we've gotten to be pretty close to where there has been power. We've had to run about a half mile at the most to trench underground. We've also done some work with a neighbor where basically we put in a power line with our tile plow.
Now, I don't know that I'd recommend that to
well,
anybody.
I don't know. It's worked out just fine, and it's been probably half a dozen years, no problem. So the big thing here is you've got to be able to run power to it, and yes, there may be some upfront cost, and that's probably the biggest thing we'll tell you about this. There's upfront cost in putting that lift station in the ground, buying the pump, the electricity, all these other things, but you got to look at, well, what's the payoff too?
You know, the other thing, Brian, you mentioned a reservoir. I want to go back to that because that makes me think, wow, we're going to have to be pretty deep, and we were pretty deep with some of our things.
Not necessarily.
It may not be work you can do yourself.
No, you don't. Well, okay, so there's two different things here. Yes, in terms of going deep, you got to be careful with those sidewalls collapsing. We had to go with one of our lift stations as deep as 20 feet. Well, that wasn't work that I wanted to have our people on our farm do, because we don't normally do that, and it's very, very dangerous. So that's when I had that hire done. But just to have a reservoir, you don't have to go super deep. Like I said, we just have a big pipe in the ground. So you can have a pipe vertically. You could also have a big pipe horizontally. We have both. So you can create a reservoir in a number of different ways.
The other thing is, we talk about a 40-acre or 70-acre field. What if you had to go a long ways? So you may need multiple lift stations along the way.
Yeah, that's possible. Otherwise, like in our case, we just ran extra deep. So that's either way you're going to do it. Personally, I'd rather have fewer lift stations and go extra deep as opposed to having multiple lift stations to bring it up and then let it fall back down with gravity. But I mean, obviously you can do whatever you would like to do. If you do have a long ways to go, you may have to work with some neighbors, and this does get a little bit tricky when we start talking about a lift station because that's expensive, and also there's going to be regular maintenance on that and regular cost with the electricity.
Now speak about the cost. What is the cost to do all of this?
Well, first of all, in terms of operating it every month, I've been pretty happy. 7 horsepower pump on our farm, our cost has been about $6 to $7 per month per acre. And when I look at that, we're talking less than 1 bushel of beans, maybe 2 bushels of corn. Have we gotten more than that? Yeah, we have. One that we've put in about 6 years ago, we've been gaining on average now roughly 30 bushels of beans and roughly 100 bushels of corn compared to where we were before we put the tile in and the lift station in. So when I'm talking that many bushels, well, then I don't mind spending a little bit of money each month. In terms of putting the lift station in, it really depends on how much you have hired done. This is going to vary quite a bit. I mean, that pump alone is probably going to cost you $10,000. Depending on your area, you may have to get some dewatering done in advance. We've had to do that ourselves, at least on one of our projects. So in other words, we had to have somebody come out a couple of weeks in advance, put up some tiny little wells where we were going to have this lift station, get it dewatered, get that water out of the ground as much as possible, so then we could dig down and the sidewalls wouldn't collapse immediately.
Well, there's definitely some work and a lot of planning that goes into putting a lift station in, but it could be of huge value to your farm for many, many years to come, especially when you've got this situation where you've got a pretty flat field and you've got to try and get water out of there somehow. This is your best bet.
Yeah, so I just wanted to finish up real quick on total costs. You might be looking at $50,000, okay, for example, but you're just going to have to get a quote for your area, your depth, your pump, your sizing, all those types of things. It's hard for me to say what it is going to be for you, but for me, when I look at it, hey, if I'm going to spend $50,000, plus I'm going to spend a little money on electricity, that comes back real fast if I have some good yield gains.
Well, speaking of improving how plants perform, you've got to keep those nasty weeds out of there. This one is definitely invasive. Can you identify this week's weed of the week?